Thank you for talking with me today and letting me ask you these questions.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so my first question is, it was touched on a little bit in the Tallahassee Democrat article about the meaning behind the show title, Twilight Sleep, but I just think it's so important, so I was wondering if you could explain it again, what it means to you.
So I have only become acquainted with the idea of twilight sleep in the last couple of years. I knew that there were complications surrounding my birth, but I wasn't really clear about what they were. And then it became clear. I had a legal name change a couple of years ago, and in doing the paperwork, my mother, in looking for my birth certificate, found the incubator card, realized my birth certificate was wrong, and we started finally talking about my birth. And I was asking more specific questions, and she said that she just didn't remember it. And I was like, well, how can you not remember my birth? So it was interesting to then work backwards and find out about this trend that occurred in the 20th century to sedate women, to give them an anesthesia. But it was problematic. It was seen as a panacea. It was supposed to improve childbirth. But if it was administered wrong, or, I mean, honestly, it was done away with because very often it led to women having a lot of pain. They just didn't remember it, and they lost control of their bodies, really. So I have now compared this to the idea of loss of female agency during patriarchy, that it's not as though we weren't intelligent, it's not as though we weren't there, but women weren't able to make contributions to literature and art in the same way because their existence was really limited. And I think I'm drawing a parallel between these, and I'm finding more and more within my work that there are themes of feminism or related to the Me Too movement, or about how women have been marginalized or abject. So I thought this was an appropriate title to discuss that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just becoming more and more of a thing and more in the conversation nowadays, and that's so important. That's really wonderful. And so you also pull from a lot of different pieces throughout art history. And I'm wondering how you choose which paintings and what artists to pull from to include in your paintings.
So when I'm working, I have like a big bin of paper, and some of it is just purely on what I can find. So it's like the quality of the reproduction, because a collage is not under the painting, but I create a collage. So the original collage for, say, this painting was this big.
Oh, wow.
And this one in particular, I had done a few trips down to the Ringling Museum and was given access to their old exhibition posters.
Wow.
So there are fragments of some paintings from the Ringling Museum's collection in here. And then, yeah, I might go to a doctor's office and look at their magazines, and then I turn, you sneeze and you tear out a picture and you put it in your purse. But it's also that I have done a lot of going to museums and taking photographs. I'll print those out. I go to libraries. And I don't know, when you're composing work, you're looking for a needle in a haystack. You just have a compulsion. And then after that compulsion that you think something might work, very often I form an obsession. Like I become very fetishistic about little fragments or parts of paintings. And sometimes it's just a mystery. Like, why am I obsessed with that or that combination? And through painting, I'm understanding the obsession. And so sometimes I combine things, but other times I've had something fall on top of each other and get stuck and just think it was the most brilliant thing.
That's cool.
Because it was an accident. And sometimes that's more genius than anything I can contrive to put together. And they make happy accidents.
Yeah, for sure. That's really cool. So I'm curious about what maybe specific artists or what time period do you look towards the most?
So after a point, like the Impressionists, painting starts to lose its structure. So I'm really interested in layered painting that has images with edges. Very often they're images that have something to do with imagination. So the majority of the work is probably from 1450 to maybe the latest would be late 1700s.
Okay.
So it's, it's really a 250-year period.
Interesting.
And I mean, some of it was considered the height of painting. Like in this painting, there's a fragment of one of the paintings that was stolen from the Elizabeth Stuart Gardner Museum.
Yes.
This is like Jesus on the Sea of Galilee. It's a painting that was never found again. And so in this context, I don't know, I guess it's just about loss and frustration, since the whole painting's about bad government, and that recovery of that painting was just a disaster. So maybe it belongs in bad government. Okay. But it was also just, can I put that in there? Like, there's also paintings of the Napoleonic War in there. So sometimes it's for the context or the content of the image. Sometimes it's because I'm obsessed with the technique of the artist. And when we were showing at the museum, we have a catalog essay, and Mark Messersmith brought up that really all painting is about painting. A painting comes with this very rich history, and so as a painter, you're taking all of the history of painting with you. And I thought that was really useful and profound, and certainly applied to how I feel about it. Part of this also, though, was becoming an art student in the late 90s. There was like a lower part. I mean, in my estimation, it was more like a death of painting, and we were told painting was dead, and painting had to kind of resurrect itself. So it wasn't representational. It wasn't figure based. So from around the year 2000, when I was in graduate school, it was about going back for the things that were lost. Like, how do we bring back narrative painting? How do we bring back representational art? It's not so much of anything of significance now, because within a 20-year period, all of this has had a major resurgence. But part of this was the desire to copy and get technique through copying, which is a part of the tradition of painting and the legacy of painting. And then to make a closeness or relationship with things from the past that were inaccessible now. Like growing up, I wasn't able to have the level of mastery I wanted, or study with somebody who was like the kind of painter I wanted to be. And then you kind of mature and figure it out for yourself. So in some way, I was painting with these books of painters open to ask them questions and have them consult, which is great, because dead people don't disappoint you, and they don't talk back, and you can have a great conversation with Holbein.
Yes, very cool. And more on a contemporary note, are there any of your fellow contemporary artists that you look towards or find yourself in conversation with?
Well, it's interesting because since 2005, so many artists moved online and have online platforms, so they're accessible. And from that moment on, I wasn't alone painting, and I wasn't a regional painter. I was interacting and having dialogues with people nationally and internationally. And I feel like I have hundreds, if not thousands, of friends who are contemporary painters who are making great work. Some of which I've met in person, some of which I've never met in person. I still consider them dear friends because we follow each other on social media. We know how we feel about each other. We do have conversations that are, just like the past. They're like letters, but they just happen to be online.
Of course,
And so, prior to 2005, it felt like this was a very solitary game. It's very isolating. And, with that comes some sorrow and some madness. But now you're more limited by how many conversations you can maintain or want to continue having. COVID made us more online, but I also have always tried to come up with reasons to meet these artists in person. So I do want to go back to the idea of why cutting things up. And so in graduate school, there's this moment where you're making your work, and sometimes you feel like you're breaking down. You feel like you're losing your mind or you're losing your identity. But that breakdown can be synonymous with the breakthrough. And I had one of these moments, and that included being upset with all of my collections of postcards, books, and attacking them with scissors and cutting them up. Part of this was the frustration that all the great paintings that had ever been painted had already been painted. And what do I have to offer? Like, who am I? But that's the moment where you have to figure out how to put your voice in the work. So there's an active deconstruction. I'm now comparing this to a fencing concept. This was also in Robert Greene's book, Mastery. So to the master goes the knife, or you might kill your master. You might out fence your master and take on their role. By cutting up the old masterworks, this was also all work made by men. And being a woman, then you can put your own voice into it. So it gives you agency and the ability to play with the parts and make new statements and repaint these works.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, so you also use a lot of religious figures and mythological figures across all different kinds of worldly cultures. And so I was just wondering what makes you gravitate towards those subjects.
I would answer that today. Part of my interests have been about power. What's powerful? What's meaningful? And certain people, I mean, human beings are born all the time, but some people become great, or some people do great things, or some people stand apart for some reason. So I grew up reading biographies of Queen Elizabeth or Napoleon. I'm interested in what makes these people different, for better or for worse. And I'm interested in human potential, but I'm also interested in the power of government and myth on humans. So it's working with iconography, powerful images. How do you deconstruct them and reconstruct them? Can you insinuate new meaning into them? Can you take power out of them? Can you make that power mean something else? So, for example, something I've used over and over again is this papal tiara that's in the altarpiece of the Mystic Lamb by Van Eyck. And I've used it over and over again in different ways. In one painting, I used it to be the breasts of an Artemis-like character. So taking it from being the symbol of the ultimate male patriarchy and power, and then turning it over, and it becomes a chalice, or it becomes a breast. It becomes a vessel for something else.
Yeah. And as a successful female artist who's part of the fine art world as well as the academic world, what's some advice that you would give to younger female artists today?
So, I mean, painting is all about practice, and that goes across the board. You know, you have to have a practice. I think it's easier to look at other disciplines like becoming a violinist. You wouldn't just own the violin, you'd play it 6 hours a day. So you have to really protect your studio time. I think the difference between studio time between perhaps the genders is women have a lot of responsibilities. If you keep a home, if you have children, we have a greater level of responsibility in the eyes of society, and very often in the household or in a partnership that's heteronormative. So you have to do everything you can to protect yourself. The other things are, how are you going to support yourself as you become? So I very purposefully gave myself limited options. Like, I knew many people who were great at waiting tables. If you get used to bartending or waiting tables or having an income from another source, you get used to a lifestyle and you're not going to paint. Painting usually has very humble beginnings, and it requires a lot of sacrifice, but you also have to be in partnerships where they're going to support what you do. So I have a group called Art Nuns, and I encourage these people who want to make a deeper commitment to their work and marry their art. It's a nice little public ritual. But the other side of that is, what does that do for your partner? So when I met my husband, I said, you know, it's nice that we're in love. It's fantastic, but I'll never marry you. I'm marrying my art. And he said, I'll just have to marry your art too.
Wow.
And so I think having a spouse that is incredibly supportive and committed to the success of your work is essential. Because it's very hard for art to just arrive.
Yeah.
You really
Takes a
need
lot
the
of
support
time.
of your family and your partnerships.
Mhm.
And we need to invest. If we want female voices, then people are going to have to do the work to support us
Yeah. It's about
and
time.
you.
Yeah, for sure. Wonderful. Okay. And finally, what feelings or takeaways do you hope people have when they interact with your work, especially from this show?
I mean, art is a two-dimensional art form. It doesn't involve time necessarily. It usually is in a house or a museum. If it is in a house, paintings are used to replace windows very often. It's like, what can you live with?
Yeah.
I can't necessarily say that all of my work is something that is created to match a couch or has a decorative appeal.
Mhm.
I think that the messages behind the work are honestly about trying to transform society, to
Mhm.
question why we held certain beliefs
Mhm.
and to question what we put our faith in.
Mhm.
So in that way, these are paintings that are here to disrupt.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested to see where they belong, but I'm
Mhm.
glad that they're in a gallery scenario so we can have conversations.
Yeah.
And maybe that will start to change how people think about religion, think about
Mhm.
their values, and maybe this can help make things better in the future.
Yeah.
So some of these paintings have an aspect of horror or menace or the root of monsters means to warn. So I think some of these are somewhat warnings
Yeah.
that society needs to invest more,
Mhm.
in particular in women.
Mhm. Absolutely. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And we're enjoying the show quite a lot. So.
Oh, thank you so much.